Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard forgot his pop filter Grizzly, and well, sorry about last time actually, because I completely did forget about my pop filter. That said, I'm kind of proud of myself. I didn't really pop in your ears all that often. But anyway, I know this is a very weird topic to kind of be talking about at this point, especially with Forsaken out there, with all the lore that we have and whatnot, but I do want to actually talk about this before it gets too far out of my mind, and especially too with reading some of the recent entries, especially just going through the new weapons within Forsaken. I found some new tiebacks that actually back up a lot of my thinkings when it comes back to the prophecies of Osiris. And this is something that on this channel at least we haven't had a chance to really dig into or talk about. My theories on the prophecies of Osiris are many-fold, and realistically there are several pieces that I think we have to dig into to really understand more of what's going on with them, and how Bungie has a roadmap for us for both Destiny 2 and possibly leading into Destiny 3 completely planned out for us. That being said, I'll get to some announcements as we kind of go through the video here, but I want to dig into today's topic before we really get into that. So if you guys don't mind waiting until after we get done the topic, I'll have some announcements for you guys afterward. Some dealing with like the 25,000 subscriber special and a couple other things besides. But first off, let's get into something that's been bothering me for a good little while now. The Grimoire card called Mysteries 2 is a very interesting one. Ingress via dreams alone. Things I saw inside. A wild river and a broken dam, or maybe it's just the sea crashing through a narrow gap, I can't be sure. Waves slam through the gap, and where they hit the stone, they throw up pillars of spray that pierce the mist and crash down in thunder. There's a giant in the cataract trying to wade against the current, and I can tell it wants to reach the lever and pull the lever, which will seal off the flow, or maybe give it the sword, but the torrent throws it back, so it just keeps its head down and tries to push on. I can't see the face, but it breathes out white smoke. I feel for it hard. A world painted around the interior like a stranger earth, averted and glued inside itself. But I don't believe this one, it's too much like a metaphor. A switchboard or a train station, empty, dead, waiting. The tunnels branch off into infinity. I stare down one for a long time and see a pale worm move in hungry coils around itself. I think this one is the most likely, although I might have brought the worm. An egg, but I'm not sure if the broth inside is warm still, or if it's gone to rot, or if the warmth comes from the struggle of the tiny winged zygote, or the bleed from the wound, or the thoughts of something thinking very hard. A star, I think. We count on stars as steady friends because they always rise and always shine, but a star's a delicate truce, an explosion caught by its own mass so that it can't erupt and can't collapse. Thus I imagine the state of the machine might be. But one force or another has gone awry, and now it rests here, snuffed and broken, waiting for the two rival forms of ruin to be set in balance again. This card can actually be broken down into a few different things, but the major piece I want to actually showcase with it is just how much it seems to ring true of this idea of being a basic storyboard for Destiny 2. The idea, especially with Portion 1, that it shows more of a similarity to the EDZ and the Shard of the Traveler. It feels proper to how the giant would be fighting against the current of darkness that seems to be overtaking itself for being away from the main traveler. Smoke might be a remnant of a fire. The limited white smoke is a possible reference to the shard itself. And especially with how we look at the arc energy that pillows off from the shard out in the EDZ, there are several things that seem to kind of point towards this being a little analogous towards the EDZ shard itself. And then the very brief point too, a world painted around the interior like a stranger earth, everted and glued inside itself, but I don't believe this one, it's too much like a metaphor. to me, this almost sounds like the Infinite Forest, and from how things would go with the EDZ initially in Destiny 2, we then naturally evolve into Curse of Osiris. And the third one just really backs up my idea. This idea of a switchboard and a train station really kind of rings true as this idea of Rasputin and what could be underneath of Clovis Bray, especially when we start to look back at the Pale Worm, thinking back to Zol. And now we see some things that are going on within the new lore, talking about an egg and a zygote and possibilities that really wear within the Ahamkara. This is really hard for me to look at this card and not think that it is in some way a prophetic piece that we have to reference very similar to those of the prophecies of Osiris. Of course, that last one has me a little bit on the interested side, especially since we already diverted the Almighty, and hopefully something doesn't happen to our son or another son, but the possibilities that exist within this card alone are staggering to me, and the fact that the prophecies of Osiris also back it up doesn't help anything. You see, the problems with the prophecies of Osiris, these 10 items that are actually lined across the 10 weapons that are also found from the Curse of Osiris expansion, not counting Perfect Paradox, of course, showcases several bits and pieces that actually line up perfectly with what might be happening within the Destiny universe. Most of these seem to line up exactly proper, going from Garden Progeny 1 all the way to Future Safe 10. And all of these just ring this possibility that everything that is going to happen is completely following in Fate's line. But of course, this comes back to the ideas of Osiris as a whole, and how Osiris overall is more just talking to us and telling us, yes, the prophecies are something that you have to take, but you have to take them with a grain of salt, and even then, I have to be mindful of what I tell you. Here, we'll read the Future Safe 10 lore tab, just to be sure on this one, and so we're on the same page of what I mean. A fragment from Osiris. Ought been easy to gather this foresight. Prophecies are tricky things. They change the future they foretell. When a seer shares their knowledge of a coming event, any event, whether good or ill, there will always be those who gather to prevent it. Say too little and your meaning is lost. Say too much and you have made the task of your enemies easier. You must say just enough so that the few who can listen will hear. I have done all I can. The rest is up to you. You must trust in me. You must trust in yourself. Osiris. Osiris understands that while giving these prophecies are a good idea for us to at least look into, to hold in the back of our minds, to start to realize that yes, what is being said is coming to pass, but how much of that should we look into? How much is it that Osiris is able to tell us without really giving everything away? And of course, this leads back to interpretation. The interpretations of the prophecies make a great deal and change a great deal from person to person in how everything can be viewed. And that is why I need to stress that anything that I do say, of course, from this point on and even beforehand, could be tenuous at best. A good majority of what I mean by this can actually be found in the Traveler's Judgment 5 lore entry. How to interpret the lost prophecies? The theory in vogue right now with the followers of Osiris is that the first verse refers to the Black Garden, the coming of Gaul, the Traveler's Awakening, and Gaul's subsequent defeat. It's a convincing interpretation, even conceding that prophecies are much easier to interpret in hindsight. There's just one thing. If Osiris used the Infinite Forest to develop his prophecies, and the Infinite Forest cannot accurately simulate light, how did Osiris predict the Traveler would wake? The Forest's very inability to predict this very thing is what prevented Panoptes from breaking ground with its apocalyptic calculations. I must assume, 1. Either verse 5 does not refer to the Traveler's Awakening, or 2. Osiris has prophetic resources at his disposal other than the forest. What they are, I have no idea. With having this in-game knowledge and having this relation come back to us from other NPCs or others that were within the universe of Destiny, I think it's important to now keep all of this in mind and go back and look through the prophecies of Osiris and why I still think these are important to this point and to this day. I know the Curse of Osiris expansion is not exactly the most liked or loved of anything that has actually been produced from, well, anything Destiny related realistically, or from most video games, but I will say that the prophecies, the further I read them, hold more and more interest for me as they go along. So anyway, without further ado, I want to honestly go down each and every prophecy and explain where I think each of them fits within the build and where it all fits within the timeline of Destiny. Please note that even though I've read the other stuff in complete log, I want to go piece by piece with this. And each of these, if you are curious on where they are, again you can find on the Curse of Osiris weapons, starting with Garden Progeny 1, and then the Conqueror 2, Jack Queen King 3, so on. You can line all of these up right in a row for yourself to make it easy to read. And I believe that this is the accepted interpretation that we have at the moment on how these prophecies are read. I mean, it makes sense going from 1 to 10, but that's me. Two siblings cleaved by time and space, reflections never found alone. The endings of the eldritch race, a path long seen, but never known. I know what we just got done reading here states that the possibilities of the Black Garden being within the first entry are quite high, or at least that's how the followers of Osiris view it. But I don't. I view this more as Anna and Elsie. For me, the idea of two siblings, of course, being within and cleaved by time and space makes a bit of sense. In a lot of ways, and a lot of interpretations, of course, Anna and Elsie are actually split entirely between time and space. And for this to be a large coincidence seems hard for me to push away. Plus the ideas of the eldritch race. I kind of falls back in line with some of my thinkings on Clovis Bray and some of the other possibilities of the Hive being underneath Clovis Bray, even before they built the structure on top of Rasputin. That's for another day. However, all of that really is for another day. And I know that leaves things vague, but realistically, a good majority of what I want to talk about doesn't happen within the first few prophecies. So, let's move on. To Tower comes a war in red, an orphan sounds the Empire's call. Mortal angels mourn the dead, while lightless light wraps night in pall. For me, this is a little bit more of an easier one to interpret, but it was one that could have been interpreted and easily figured out if we had heeded the whims and ideas of what Future War Cult had told us about seeing the city and the tower in flames as they were. This could have been avoided in some regards, but we decided to not heed it, and of course we ended up having the Red War, and Gaul, well, I think most of us know the rest with how Destiny 2 panned out. An army meets and stands and falls. Three nobles wage their hopeless war. In shifting madness, evil crawls. One stands above the battle's roar. What I find interesting, however, is how most of these actually seem to interpret and work with the Red War. And it does seem like there were several weeks that passed between us actually going from the city out till Twilight Gap and a few other spots besides, so I'm wondering if the Red War didn't happen over the course of even months past what we end up thinking previously. This would be a larger time period, of course, in order to interpret and constantly think of how these prophecies could be interpreted. And it makes me wonder, of course, how quickly the Red War wrapped up before the events of Curse of Osiris started, if that makes sense. I know a large majority of the time when I see things that are referenced with time to Destiny, it's supposed to be 1-to-1. 1 year passes within our time, and 1 year actually passes with Destiny as well. So I'm wondering if it actually takes place over the couple of weeks, or if it takes place elsewhere. Maybe I'm not making too much sense, but I hope that does make sense. Still, my interpretation of this clef, before I keep getting a little bit off topic here, It almost seems to me that these nobles that are spoken of would be the vanguard of Ikora, Cayde, and Zavala, and the one that may rise above the battle's roar might be us. But that's just, again, my interpretation. For most of this, in the beginning, it really does feel like a good majority actually still talks about the Red War, and again, I just find that interesting that Osiris would focus so heavily on that, but it is a tumultuous time for us within the city, or really, outside of it. A charnel but effulgent orb, a beacon in a loathsome dark, fetid corpses rise, a too long absent gibbous spark. Now here is where things get to be kind of weird. For me, Clef 4 seems to at least ring to me that the Traveler's burst of light, and to me this is where he may have awoken, or it may have awoken. This is what causes Nokris and Mars to start to revert and start to thaw out of the ice. But again, that's very tentative. But for me, especially when I start to read things like fetid corpses rise, a too long absent gibbous spark, for me, this really does give me a hint that Nokris or something else is becoming more alive and awoken once again. Not to say the awoken in the Reef, of course. But of course, lining up with what was mentioned within Traveler's Judgment 5, this is where it is thought that verse 5 may be where the Traveler awakens, and this kind of contradicts my feelings on point 4. A visitor ignites the sky, and in the truth of light it dreams. Above the dead and yet to die, a legion's blade with fire screams. Now obviously, the legion's blade may actually refer back to Gaul and the awakening of the Traveler, and for this I kind of agree. But of course, again, that doesn't really tie back to what's happening with my initial impressions of number 4, and at least where all of that would kind of wrap in. Anyway, Clef 6, however, does give me more tell of why things may not be exactly in order, and why events may still be, in some regard, parallel or perpendicular to each other, but not exactly in line. Amid the endless death one flew, unnatural, all-consuming need, and in the space between the two, accursed comprehension freed. This cleft is where things start to be a little bit more interesting, especially with Forsaken. And really, I probably could have started here, but I wanted to make sure that I had a full record of my thoughts when it came down to the actual prophecies of Osiris. But this one definitely makes me think a little bit. The space between the two. For me, this calls back immediately to the Awoken, this thin line that they walk between light and dark, and how they are a culmination between the two. And really, it speaks and almost screams to me of the ideas of Uldren. Amid the endless death, one flew, unnatural, all-consuming need. Uldren's entire purpose, his entire basis, was that he was one of the survivors, of course, against Oryx at Saturn, and he still has a need to find his sister and to bring her back, to hopefully make a culmination or make something more of the people of the Awoken, or otherwise. And obviously, we know that that doesn't necessarily come to pass, especially if you've played Forsaken at this point. And Clef 6 is where I think we kind of stop with our understanding of where we are with the prophecies, though we could argue perhaps point 7. A spark of knowledge with each fall, the purpose of the endless youth. No longer shunned, dark's nameless call now brings about Tenebrous truth. The way that I interpret this prophecy really leans back towards Cayde and his death. It really makes me feel that, especially if Uldren had showed up sometime during or right after the Red War, to have himself be imprisoned within the Prison of Elders or otherwise, and then we end up getting this notion of, hey, this prison break is happening, and now Cayde goes, and of course our Guardian as well, to the Prison of Elders. Let me read again what I mean by this. A spark of knowledge with each fall, the purpose of the endless youth. Spark of knowledge with each fall would really signify to me the death of Cayde. For me, it does kind of showcase this idea that now we start to see that we're we're not immortal in any way. We now understand entirely that being in this state as guardians really comes at a price. And to understand the knowledge of death just as much as being alive means quite a bit in terms of being that guardian. But now we have a choice to make. Do we seek vengeance for Cade, or do we allow things to pass and just be as they are? And of course, we kind of all know the answer to that, especially if you've been keeping up with Forsaken and how that was in the beginning. Vengeance is our answer. Anyway, maybe I'm not being too clear with this. The whole idea is that this Cleft 7, really does make me think that we are the ones falling into this pit of darkness in a way, or giving into things that aren't necessarily great for us as guardians. And we see that with a couple of newer entries with our ghost actually as well. He starts to, of course, question how it is that we're acting. And granted, even through Forsaken's story, we also see these notions. But all the same, it feels like we're falling into a pit, and we're liable to fall a little bit further. And that actually leads me to the next Cleft, or Cleft 8. They sowed the first, now reap the last, forever narrows to a line, where light will fade into the past. When all's converted, nothing shines. And here's where things get to be a little bit more unknown. We don't really have a lot to go by when it starts to be in any of these extra clefts, so for me, I have to sit back and think, well, these prophecies have to be interpreted by some events that we don't see yet, obviously. But for me, Cleft 8, or Prophecy 8, at least showcases the idea that we're further falling into darkness. Now, of course, the side note to make of this is that Osiris did not see our guardian when making the prophecies themselves, so this is something that's a little different to kind of keep in mind. That being said, though, he was able to at least what the effects of either Cade's death or otherwise would have had on the tower, and in doing so also saw what they would have had on our guardian as well, even if we aren't a larger part in what these prophecies are supposed to talk about or provide. I suppose, if nothing else, it just shows a bit of perspective and interpretation to why I feel that this is just a falling further into a darker realm, and how, especially with what's going on with Ikora and Zavala, things might be a little tenuous at best when it comes to relations within the tower. I also have another reason for this, but I want to return to it after I get done reading all of these prophecies. A sacred eye that speaks in lies, upending future in its path. The way before us to the skies shall see itself in ancient wrath. Just as Uldren was, just with how he was changed and how he started to turn from being taken or being altered by the forces that did seem to govern his mind even before what had happened with Destiny 1, before Destiny 2 was even a thing, and before the Battle of Oryx had even happened. Uldren's manipulated mind was still highly in question. Again, I know I'm being vague with some of that, but there are pieces that I have yet to read about this lore, and these are just little nitpicks that I've been able to kind of pick up as I've skimmed it. But that one, in particular, kind of really makes me think that our guardian, in a lot of ways, is going to start feeling similar manipulation, even with our powers of the light. But because we are starting to fully fall, because we are starting to give in to these ideas of vengeance and darkness within our hearts, it's different. It's a different guardian than what we were seeing or have seen before. And even then, if it doesn't pertain back to our guardian, what does it say about anything with Ikora and Zavala now being within the tower and being as the vanguard as they are? What about our other leadership? What is the effect fully of what the Traveler actually has now that it's awake and now that it's hovering so close to us? We've seen the effects of a dormant Traveler. They seem pretty benign. But how would they be, especially with the Traveler fully awakened, as Osiris does puts it, as there is both good and bad that would pervade behind it? All in all, it just seems like we're going to fall to the dark for improper reasons, or manipulation or otherwise, and we've seen plenty of that within what actually has been most of Destiny. We see it with Dredge and Yor, we've seen it now with Uldren, we've seen it with either Kabir or Praedyth and that fire team. there are several individuals that show this case of manipulation, and they're important to notate that it is something that can happen with us. We're just as susceptible as Guardians. Don't forget that. But perhaps, and regardless, this is what leads to the final prophecy. Perhaps the thing that ends the universe as a whole. Perhaps the thing that is its gateway into something that is unforeseen. See who's robed as if a god, who stands with pride above the rest. Destroy this ancient, nameless fraud. Destroy the one whose death was blessed. One different thing about Forsaken in comparison to some of the other expansions that we've had is that there's going to be a lot of extra expanded pieces that we'll see over the course of the next year. And even if you don't participate in them, I have a feeling that they're still going to affect you, especially with your ideas of what is happening around the universe of Destiny. What we're unsure of is how Cleft or Prophecies 7 and on are going to actually influence what happens within the story and the development of Destiny as a whole, as a full universe. But this last prophecy piece can be interpreted in so many different ways. Is it talking about the Traveler? Is it talking about this being the last piece for the Traveler to sit and garner and have in front of itself, for us to rise up and finally realize that it's really not a good thing to have around? Or is it something different entirely? Is it Callus, who's finally moved on to trying to have us be within his shadows, and he moves to actually devour Earth instead of just a small little planetoid known as Nessus? Does he try to really take us by force, or is there something else that happens? Is it Nezarec? Is there actually some truth that Nezarec jumps up from out of nowhere, and this fake nameless god that has really only existed in pre-Golden Age text might actually have some truth and realism behind it? Is it Zivu Arath or Savathun? Will they finally pop out of the ashes and start to do something for us as late as Cleft 10? Or is it something with the pyramid ships that we otherwise see, the darkness or otherwise, that exists that we're not sure of entirely? All of these possibilities exist when we start to look at the prophecies of Osiris, and how many openings that they do actually leave for the story to keep them vague and open, certainly, but to still drive home this entire thought that this story is moving in a direction of far from all light. It is very much a grimdark society. It's very much a grimdark universe that is actually being painted within the realms of what we see within Osiris Prophecies or otherwise. Still, remember that idea of what I had mentioned with the 7th prophecy and how it feels like we're falling further into this idea of darkness? Well, somebody seems to perpetuate that. Somebody by the name of the Drifter. And when I start to read the Malfeasance card and its entry, I start to get a little bit of a feeling that he is the crossroads of everything for us. Yes, I wrote you a note. I want you to burn this in your memory. If you're wielding this gun, I've already told you all this and more, but I want you to keep it fresh in your mind. I want you to have this. You may need it. You and I have done a lot together in this system, and I hope and pray we'll get to do a lot more. It'll be a lot safer with you wearing one of these. It's the culmination of a lot of things. Long time ago, I set out to find a replacement for a weapon called Thorn. This will never be that, but to me, it's better. We built it together. And all of us, with this in hand, even the man with the golden gun should have pause. Maybe we can't outshoot him. Maybe he can't be outshot. But if we all take our shot together, we don't have to beat him to it. He'll die too. Remember this, for when the day comes. The Drifter. This entry really does seem like the Drifter is capitalizing on what he can pull out of us, and capitalizing on the vengeance that we actually see at this point, especially knowing that Cade was just shot and killed in front of us, that effectively we are out for vengeance for one reason or another. And it seems by participating in Gambit, or by just helping the Drifter in general, he gets this idea that we are also after some type of balance, and perhaps that is what he is after overall when it comes down to this man with the golden gun. For me, it kind of plays back to the idea of what we just got done reading with Cleft 7. A spark of knowledge with each fall, the purpose of the endless youth. No longer shunned, Dark's nameless call now brings about Tenebra's truth. We, as Guardians, are susceptible. We are susceptible to any type of vengeance or any kind of emotion that may exist within us, but something sometimes has to act upon us in that notion. Otherwise, we seem to be fairly righteous in how we handle ourselves. Over time, we may drift. We may change, we may alter in terms of how it is we view the world, the universe, or otherwise. And of course, when I think about the name of the Drifter, I can't help but think that that might be something that actually leads back to it. And of course, this thought of this man with the golden gun. Even then, the Drifter says, the man with the golden gun. And that leads me back to one possibility, or one possibility only. Shin Malfeasance. If Shin Malfeasance happens to be alive, is he the one that could save us from our fall? Is he the one that ultimately could be the one to pull us from how we are falling into darkness? How everything that we start to see may change or alter? And for me, that is an ultimate possibility. If Shin Malfeasance were to rise back up out of anywhere that he may be, see what it is that we even have become, especially if we acquire that dreaded Dredgen title, then it makes me wonder how anything or everything could handle, or how he could see us, this hero of the tower, this hero of the city, and how we've started to fall. Perhaps he's the one within Clef 9 or Prophecy 9 that will pull us back from the darkness and bring us back to truth, and bring us back into what we need to do to end the true foe that actually stands in front of us, whoever that may be from Prophecy 10. For now, however, that is as far as I've been able to get into things, and I hope that my point of view on the Prophecies of Osiris is a bit clear at this point. I know that they are still very muddied, and overall there is a lot that can still be expanded and changed upon, but I do at least think that there is some truth behind what's going on, especially when we compare it back to Mysteries 2, like I had talked about at the top of the show. And before I do decide to wrap things up here and move into some of those announcements I had mentioned, if you guys do decide to head out beforehand, thank you for watching all the same. Thank you for hitting any buttons that you know are down there, subscribe, like, whatever. Regardless, I thank you guys for listening, but I'll move into some announcements here. First off, just to make sure, in case you guys aren't too aware of it, since I seem to mention it and all of a sudden a bunch of people join in, I do have a Discord chat, so don't forget to jump in, say hi once in a while, and kind of converse with us about either lore or spoilers or anything else that's going on. The chat is generally free, open. LFG chat is there too if you're just looking for somebody to jump in and play a couple games with on any platform. Though I know for some reason I have a extraneous and large amount of Xbox players, and I'm on PC and very few are there. It's kind of sad in a way. Anyway, just to let you guys know that Discord is there. Second, 25,000 subscribers happened, and I have yet to get back to my ideas of what I want to do for you guys. So that is where I'm going to actually post, if you guys can try to pay attention, over on the communities page, another poll. And this poll will ultimately have the choices that I make of what it is that I want to actually do. I'm thinking right now that an Ask Me Anything is definitely going to be on there. Special joke lore video or something else, or requested lore videos as well. But I'll get back to you guys ultimately on what I decide. I saw a lot of different suggestions, and I'm going to actually take them all into account, and then we'll post it on a poll. We'll see what happens. I really am thinking I want to do 2 videos, though, for 25,000, because I haven't done too much in the past for other specials. So, anyway, 25,000 subs, definitely a big deal. I don't want to let that go too far to waste, and I want to get better about doing a lot of those thank you videos as well. Additionally, as this video was, you'll probably hear that I want to try to do some more unscripted content. Now, part of this comes down to two reasons. The first is that I feel I'm starting to get my voice, especially with doing the podcast a little bit more with Focus Fire Chat. I'm on that weekly, by the way, in case I don't mention that enough. But I want to try to do things a little bit more spontaneously, especially with either announcements that come from Bungie or things that kind of creep out of nowhere and all of a sudden I have to talk about them just spontaneously, like I said. But that's tough for me to say if I really want to keep doing a lot of unscripted content. But more than anything, especially right now, the reason that I'm doing unscripted is so I have a little bit more time to focus on what it is I'm looking at with Forsaken's lore. So I have a little bit more time to really dig into that. So if you guys can bear with me for a little while, I hope that these unscripted videos are just as nice for you guys too, but I kind of like making them. I know that I stumble a little bit more, but I like that because it does showcase a little bit more of my humanity, I suppose. I'm definitely not a robot. I'll put it that way. I might be an exo in game, but I'm not a robot. I also feel like unscripted content also opens up this idea of more talks that we can have. It facilitates more discussion. I know that scripted content can as well, but I feel a lot of times when I start to script my content, I start to get all of my answers to my questions embedded into my scripts, and I kind of hate that. I want to leave things a little bit more open, and especially with something like the Prophecies of Osiris, like we just covered, I feel like that's a bigger deal as well. That opens up a lot of new discussion now that I think we can have, especially for the future of the universe of Destiny. Additionally, with the 25,000 sub specials, and then also looking into how Forsaken's lore is, I really don't want to cover a lot of Forsaken lore topics unless they can really and easily, like we had today with Malfeasance and a couple others, really tie it back to the lore as what I have. But even then, it'll be tentative at best. For instance, I may have covered the letter from the Drifter, but there are still a lot of entries from the Drifter that I need to talk about. I may also talk about somebody named Mithrax, though I might leave that for a little while. I don't know. I gotta see. But a lot of this stuff is tentative, and I'm just getting it from one source right now, which has actually been from Ishtar and just from the weapons within the game that we've had added. That's about the only time I've had to really look through much else. But anyway, I'm rambling on at this point. It is just to point out that there are plenty of topics that I want to talk about, but I'm taking my time with it. And I do appreciate you guys being patient with me as I really dig into the lore as best I can. I have plenty of other topics I want to discuss and look into, stuff that I didn't exactly push myself to do because I thought it was going to be useless to talk about, but I'm getting a lot of that out of my system at this point, and I hope that this video in general gives you an idea of that. And really, that's where I want to end things. Just thank you in general for being so patient with me as I change my style, as I change my ways, as I start to realize that a large majority of the stuff that I make is, and not to toot my own horn, but pretty good. At least I would like to think. But as always, I will ever worry about the quality of my content. I don't want to waste your guys' time. I don't want to sit here and just ramble on for absolutely no reason like I am right now, I know, but that's the kind of stuff that bothers me in a way. I don't want it to turn into that. But certain amounts of topics, certain amounts of content almost call for it, almost make it that I have to talk about it in that regard. And especially with, of course, the YouTube algorithm and the way that YouTube likes to play, I have to do things up this way. Anyway, now I just feel like I'm making excuses, so I'll stop that. I simply enjoy making content, and me going away for 3, sometimes 4 days makes me feel creatively just drained. I don't get a chance to actually sit here and talk with you guys like I would like to, and that kind of sucks. A lot of times that really sucks for me. So yeah, if you hear something that really sounds like it's unscripted, it probably is. And it's because I just want to make something to connect with you guys again, and hopefully not waste your time, ultimately. That's my goal, as always. But anyway, if you guys sat through all of this, I thank you so much. And again, just thank you for your support, especially over the last year here again. We're going into a new age of Destiny, and an absolute new age of, I think, what this channel can do as well. And I hope what it is that I can connect with and do for you guys to spark your interest and keep your minds thinking and going. That's my ultimate goal, especially with this year coming up, along with many other things. We'll see how everything goes, however. Sometimes everything is just a little too prophetic to keep in mind. Anyway, to Guardians and non-Guardians alike, I'll see you next space time. And thank you so much again for watching. Take care.